But I also started, when I was in 11th grade, I started ghost inking for a couple of artists like Dave Simons and these guys, Ken Landgraf, Armando Gil. They had a studio, and after school I would go there and I would ink Howard the Duck magazine pages over Gene Colan, and I would. What? Yeah, and I would ink.
I've never heard any of this.
I also.
Hang on, I need you to go back a little bit. How did that happen? Like, how did you go from my kids to inking Howard the Duck and all that? You know. Okay, how do I sell you guys on Nemesis, our first ever book from Dark Horse Comics, coming in July?
Imagine a genius playboy billionaire philanthropist, but he's a city's worst nightmare. He's so bad, all the heroes have to get together and stop him. But now he's back and he's looking for revenge. Check out this art from Valerio Giangiordano. He's one of the best guys I've ever worked with. Rogues Gallery has turned out really special. You guys are going to love it.
Well, what do you think?
It's okay.
Hey, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you perfectly. You hear me okay, yeah?
Yeah.
Good to see you. It's been a wee while.
You too. It's a little blurry on your end. You look a little fuzzy.
That might just be me, you know.
Okay.
I think it'll sort itself out. I think like the guy who produces these is amazing, so there'll be some amazing trick he can do that I don't understand, you know.
All right, okay. Let me just tweak my color. It looks a little too colorful going on.
I like it, but like it's good to see you. You know, like it's funny. I always think, doing these, I'm catching up with everybody because I live millions of miles away and everything, and I'm always shocked how well some people have aged and how badly some people have aged. You know, like you look pretty much exactly the same going back the whole career.
The glasses are the last, maybe 10 years. The glasses is the only different thing because I think just doing too much close work and all the inking I've done, it's like the eyes were bound to go. But everything else is. I mean, I'm 63, so
crazy.
You know, I could look worse.
You're lucky you're Italian. Like the Italians have got good genes, you know. Like, have you ever been over, you know, like in places around that region, like Sardinia and all that kind of stuff? Like, people look amazing. It's crazy, you know.
You know, I think the secret for me is just I'm kind of a happy person, so I don't think you age as quick if you're happy.
Do you know there's probably something in that? But in prison, people must look terrible. You know, they must look awful. You know? But like.
Well, you know, we have mutual friends that you know they don't take care of themselves, or they you know how it goes. They
Frank Whiteley, Frank Whiteley.
Yeah, I mean, you know, so they look a lot older than we do, and I noticed the single guys look the worst.
Really?
Yeah, I noticed like the guys that are single look like they've been through like a war or something. At least my friends.
No, my single pals weirdly look brilliant, and I've realised what it is they don't have kids, right? So like they're lying in Sunday mornings to lunchtime and everything, you know. Yeah. Whereas I'm up at 6 o'clock watching Bluey, you know.
Right. We don't have kids. We have neighbors' kids that we kind of take care of, and we're like aunts and uncles to like a lot of friends' kids, you know. Right. But our own kids. No, we decided early on, you know, we didn't want to have kids, and we just figured we'd be great aunt and uncles for a lot of other people's kids. So
I would never even do the aunt and uncle thing. I barely have the energy for my own kids, never mind other people's, you know. It's like, you know, well, you must be saints.
Well, everybody I know has kids, so it's like I feel like we have like a lot of kids. You know, I feel like they don't. They're wonderfully that they don't understand the boundaries of their own family, and they have no problem coming over, and we just have my neighbors just borrowing one of our cars, and I'm just like, you know, he's got to go to work and his car's in the shop, and I'm like, yeah, take one of the cars. You know, it's like that kind of thinking. It's just like it's like a big community with my friends and the kids, and it's great. I mean, you know, I think because I came from a big family, I didn't want to really. I just wasn't dying to have kids. I always told Amanda, though, if you did get pregnant and you wanted to have a kid, no problem either. I grew up teaching arts and crafts in camps, so I'm used to like a lot of kids at once.
Yeah.
I used to have kids like a dozen or two, a couple of times a day doing arts and crafts. So I'm used to a lot of screaming, yelling, little guys running around and girls running around. So
how many Palmiottis were there? How many of you guys were there growing up?
There's four. I have one younger brother, Pete, and I have two older brothers, Vic and Tony. And two of them live within 100 miles from here, and one's in Kentucky. My younger brother's in Kentucky.
I like Vic Palmiotti. Sounds like a guy that means business. I like that. You know?
Vic is he's a very he's his own guy. Like, I don't know if do you have brothers and sisters?
There's 6 of us. Yeah, my mum was from a family of 12. So I mean,
okay. So in my family, almost none of us are the same.
Right.
In a way, we're completely different. So my brother Victor works at the airport in Tampa, and he's retired. He used to work on the Verrazano Bridge in New York.
Right.
A city worker, and then he retired, moved down here, and now he's working at the airport because he has to keep working. He likes working. When my younger brother Pete is an artist, and he tries to, he does some little independent books here and there. He worked for DC for a little bit. He has the curse of having my last name. And then my brother Tony is he's like a camp director on cruise ships. Like, he has groups of people that he corrals, and they go out like on these cruises, and he's like the camp director. He's
That's
very
amazing.
Very social to everybody but his family.
And was anybody else into comics? Were you the only comic guy?
My younger brother Pete, of course, and then my older brothers, they've always had them around, but I think music was a stronger thing in my family than comics. I think my two older brothers, my one brother had a recording studio that I used to hang out with all the time. I used to go to a recording studio after school, and my older brother, he's 10 years older than me, so he tried to go to Woodstock. He couldn't get all the way there. It's a long story, but he still has his Woodstock tickets he bought. But he's like another generation, like a different generation than I remember being 8 years old and listening to him playing, Hendrix and Jefferson Airplane, and Starship was later. Beatles and Rolling Stones and stuff. I grew up with that soundtrack in the background in my house,
It's interesting though, because I think a lot of comic guys have got that weird age displacement. Like, because I'm the same. Like, one of my brothers, we're all the same mum and dad, but one of my brothers was 22 years older than me, or he is 22 years older than me. So the stuff I grew up with was the stuff I was into, like me and my friends were into. The generation before, which was my brothers, and then my parents grew up in the 30s and 40s,
Right.
So I'll be happy watching a Marx Brothers movie or a Billy Wilder movie or something like that, as I am sitting watching a James Cameron movie, growing up.
I think because we also grew up where TV only had like 12 channels or 13 channels, and even more, right, even more. And I remember, for me growing up, it was like Tarzan movies on Sunday and Abbott and Costello, and I knew my grandfather liked Laurel and Hardy, and I always watched the Marx Brothers movies. So anything from the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s was fair game. It felt like yesterday to me. If it was in black and white, I just figured, okay, that came out when my parents were watching TV. I just assumed that was it. But also, we didn't have a color TV till maybe 70s. So, because I remember when my dad got the color TV, neighbors would come and look at it. Mm-hmm. That was like a thing, right? Because it was expensive back then, and we grew up very poor. So we grew up, in a small house with 4 boys, with our aunt and uncle upstairs with their kids, and. So it was not there was not a lot of privacy, and it was small. The good news is that I didn't know we grew up poor until later on. Later on, I remember my first girlfriend had a swimming pool in her house, and it was the most abstract. Like, you went from the living room, you'd open up these doors, and it was a giant indoor pool, and it was the most abstract thing I've ever seen. Like, I was like, "You have a pool in your house? Like, what does your father do? Is he a millionaire or something? And she's like, he's a lawyer. And I'm like, oh, okay, they must be rich because, you know, who has a pool and then who has one in their house, you know? And it's funny, what I considered rich back then was just anybody with 2 cars, right? Because we had 1 car and it was always a used car. And because my uncle was a mechanic. So we'd always sell my dad a car for $200 that he got for $100. And then eventually it would go to Victor, and then it would go to Anthony, and then it would go to me. So that not only was the clothing handed down, but so were the cars, you know? But again, I didn't, it wasn't until later where I realized that, you know, that, okay, we didn't have a lot of money. I think the sit down time was when I wanted to go to art college, and my dad sat me down and said, here's the bank book. Here's all the money we have. And it was like $12,000. This was like 78, 79. Yeah. And he said, how much is your tuition for the first year? And I said, it's $4,500 per semester, so it's $9,000 for the year. And my dad's like, have you looked into the city colleges? And I said, I will tomorrow. You know, it was like those conversations where I was like, okay, I just have to think a little differently, because I wanted to go to the more expensive art schools in Manhattan, but I couldn't afford it. And even with scholarship stuff and everything was very slim back then. So when I wound up going to City College instead, and they had art direction, art departments there, and I did very well. I was an honor student. I applied for a TAP and BEOG, which in the States is you need help for rent, you need help for, you know, it was every kind of handout I could get, I applied to, and I got all of them. So, but the thing was, in order for me to get them, I had to keep a grade record that was perfect, like almost perfect. And I did. I did 2 years of college for art direction, and then I went in to got a couple of jobs doing art direction for advertising agencies, and that was the bulk of my 20s, coming out of high school, college, and the work. I worked in advertising agencies. It wasn't exactly what I wanted to do, but early on in my high school, I went to the High School of Art and Design in New York, which you have to take a test to get into. Yeah. And I had like Mark Texera was in my class. He was one of my guys. And the class before me was Dennis Cowan and Joe Jusko were there. Wow. And there was an art and it had comic book art in it. And I took that. And while I was there, I got a job doing backgrounds for Chick Stone, who was working on the... who was working... I was
obsessed with those books. I love them. Yeah, they're great.
Yeah, and it was when he was doing the Invaders, he was inking the Invaders at Marvel in the 70s. And I did some backgrounds for him, and he fired me after one page because he said it looked like a photograph. But it's in Avengers. It's in Invaders 41. It's still in that page is still in there that I did. But I also started when I was in 11th grade. I started ghost inking for a couple of artists like Dave Simons and these guys, Ken Landgraf, Armando Gil. They had a studio, and after school I would go there and I would ink Howard the Duck magazine pages over Gene Colan, and I would I would ink.
I've never heard any of this.
I also
hang on. I need you to go back a little bit. How did that happen? Like, how did you go from a kid to inking Howard the Duck?
So what happens is in the 70s, obviously it was a different world, and these a bunch of artists comic artists in Manhattan had a studio that they shared. It was a one-bedroom. It was a studio apartment with a fire escape. Okay, right. And I went in there, and there was like 3 or 4 artists working. And how I got that job is somebody was they were going around to my high school looking for people that would be able to help them, because these guys were took on too much work, didn't have great schedules, and the other thing was that they had this studio apartment that I walked in, and you see a bunch of guys working on comics, and I'm like, that's the coolest thing in the world. Yeah. But when I walked in, it wasn't until like the 3rd time I went there, I realized, because I asked one of the guys, I said, where do you guys, do you guys live here? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, well, where do you live? How do you sleep? And I realized that one of the walls that I was looking at that had all these pasted artwork and reference, they were mattresses that would go down at night. So,
oh my God.
So it was like all these Xeroxes hanging on the back of these mattresses, and they put them and then one of the guys would sleep on the fire escape. So they were doing like a bunch of, there was a comic called Time Warp, which was a DC like 100 page.
Yeah.
So,
the magazine.
So there were guys like Don Newton penciling, and they were doing mostly inking, right?
Yeah.
And so when I got there, they're like, what can you do? And I said, well, I can do backgrounds, I can do figures. And they started giving me more and more work. Now, I think because they were so desperate with deadlines, they were like, yeah, give this new kid more and new kid more. And I was making no money. I was inking pages that would wind up 2 or 3 months later, they'd be in comics. So I would see my work. I was in high school. I would see my pages being printed. I was so excited. But I had like a sit down with my dad at one point, and he's asking me, so yeah, you're doing all this work. What are you getting paid? And I said, well, they owe me money. I said, I kind of get $5 for that page and, whatever. And my dad's like, so these are working on? I said, yeah, they all have books. And he goes, it doesn't sound like the greatest living. And I'm like, no. I said, Dad, they don't even have like a bedroom. And all this is one room and a fire escape with 2 windows and a bathroom. And it's not the nicest bathroom either. And he's like, maybe, just maybe, you should look into maybe doing something else if the money's that bad in that profession. And that's how I got into advertising, because I was like, okay. And literally when I worked for those guys for a while, we did so many random comics. I don't have any of the work I did. Actually, I was drawing my own book at the time, and I brought it in to show the guys, and they lost it somehow. And I think that's when I said I got to get out of here, because they just lost a 30-page book I drew, and I was like, I'm like, where could it go? We're in one room. Like, what happened to it? And
this is the maddest thing. This is the maddest thing I've ever heard in my life, right? Like,
well, then you're going to enjoy.
I've never known anyone to get into comics. Like, a guy comes to the school looking for comic artists, and then it's this weird bunch of guys all living together. Like Grandpa Joe and Willy Wonka, where the 4 people are in the one bed. It sounds like that.
At least in Grandpa Joe, they had a nice like vaulted ceiling, and they had a big cozy bed with a lot of blankets, with the whole family under the blankets. These guys literally had one of those like it was like an oven. They had an oven with a grill on top, but like everything was made within it. I got to be honest with you, I don't even remember there being a refrigerator, but I'm sure there was one. But it was probably hidden under some comic pages or something. It
sounds like Gangs of New York or something like that.
It was like
the way America was 100 years earlier.
Yeah, it was like working for Bill the Butcher, except it was comics, right?
See, I met Alan Moore when I was 13, and I remember thinking, I want to be that guy. I'd love to do what that guy does. So you literally had the opposite experience. Like, comics must have seemed like a terrifying experience.
It's funny because I at the time, I was in high school, and again, I was doing sample pages. I would go to some of the smaller conventions. I went to the big Marvel convention. They had one in '76, the Marvel Comics convention, and I would show my samples around. And I had one professor. I don't even want to name him, but he asked me if I had any other skills, and one of the guys, at least one, like a couple of guys were super nice to me. Like I just remember George Perez was just starting, and he was nice. And there's a couple of guys. But the guy who took the most time with me was Jim Strenko. I brought some pages over, and he looked at them, and he says, okay. And he pulled out a piece of tracing paper and stuck it over my page and started showing me what I should do. You got to think a little differently. You got to think like a movie director, but you got a good start here. And he was really generous. And the other guy was, it was in 1979. I was in high school, and they had a comic. It was called the Comic Art Gallery in New York. It was a little art gallery that sold some art, mostly based on art type of books, And they had a Bernie Wrightson show.
Yeah. And
they had Bernie Wrightson watercolors and those big drawings that he used to do, and they were crazy prices for me. They were in the hundreds, which was crazy money for me. But at the end of the show, I got to sit down with Bernie. And he went over all the art supplies with me. He made a list, and he told me, this is how you use a brush, and this is how you would use that pen. he was so generous to me. And I was such a pain in the ass to him. I thought back, it's funny because like a month before he passed, I sat with him and I said, look, I just want to apologize for being such an a-hole when I was a kid. And he goes, I remember that. I remember sitting with you and you wrote down everything I said. And I said, I did. I said, I thought I was getting like the words from God. I must write down everything. Nobody can do anything better than Bernie writes. And I said, yeah, you taught me how to roll a brush. I said, I always bought a brush and I didn't understand, like, how do I get this damn point on it? And Bernie just showed me. He says, look, you roll it, kid. You roll it until it's almost, that kind of stuff. And, and that was all when I was in high school. I never not loved comics. Like when I went into advertising, I still bought comics. I still went to the comic shops on Wednesdays and picked up my books. But it wasn't until maybe like 5 or 6 years later, and this is another funny thing. I don't know how this happened, but somebody said to me, there's a bunch of guys in Brooklyn, in Bay Ridge, that are looking for some comic artists, and I went to this address, a friend of a friend, I can't even remember who gave, and I went to the address, and it was in an Italian neighborhood, and it was these one family houses, and there was one house that had a bunch of monster rubber masks in the window, like a row of 7 heads, and it was in the window, and I'm sure everyone in the neighborhood hated this house, and I went to the door. And I met this guy, Brian Marshall, and this guy, Tony Eng. And inside was Evan Dorkin and Joe Rubenstein's. And all these guys were in there. And I was like, they were all working on books. And Joe was just there. He was just stopping by. But I remember Evan, Brian, and Tony were like the 3 main guys. And they say, look, we got this deal with this company, Eternity Comics. And they do black and white comics. And what can you do? And I said, I could draw, I can ink. I said, I could do anything. And they're like, here, we have these Ron Lim X-Mutants comics. You want to ink them? And I'm like, how much do I get? And they're like, $300 a book. And I'm like, give me a book. And and while I worked in advertising, I inked these books like Ninja and X-Mutants and New Humans and these Alienation was one of them, like based on the TV show. I inked all these things, and boy, I was terrible. But I was actually making some people look better. And again, at the same time, I was hanging out with guys like Evan Dorkin, and I met Rubenstein. I met all these different people that would give me advice and what to do, while I worked a full-time job at an ad agency where I actually eventually became a partner. So I was making a great deal of money and then slumming it at night with the comic guys. And literally, it was a diet of pizza and 64-ounce Cokes. We worked all through the night. And at some point, once in a while, we got a book, and we said, let's see if we can ink this by the morning, where everyone grabbed the page. And when it was like guerrilla comic book work. Again, though, it gave me the sense of this is really not the business for me, because I'm not making any money. And it wasn't until I think it was my 30th birthday. I had an epiphany while I was at my girlfriend's house that I'm like, I need to do comics for a living. I think with my background in advertising, I can figure out how to make a good living doing them. I just need to not do what everyone else is doing. And at a convention, I saw Mark Texera, who was my high school buddy. And at the time, he was doing Ghost Rider and Punisher monthly. 2 books. He was drawing in 2 books monthly. And he said to me, he says, look, if you can help me out, I can get you into the company. And I said, how about this? I'll only help you out if we work in the Marvel bullpen. And he said, fine. So my ad agency was only 3 blocks from Marvel. So every day I would finish my work. I would go over and bring my inking supplies, pencils and everything, go over to Marvel. And at 5 o'clock, half of the place emptied out. Editors were still there and everything, but it emptied out. And there was a big bullpen with empty desks. I would set up at a desk, and then Mark would give me some Ghost Rider and Punisher pages to help him ink. And at the end of every week, I would always do samples, and I would drop them off Xeroxes in all the editors' offices. And eventually, eventually people like Bobby Chase and Terry Cavanaugh and all these guys started giving me work. Don Daly was a big one with the Punisher office. But eventually I started picking up work where, hey, this book is late. Can you do these 4 pages? Or this guy's pencils are not quite there. Can you fix the legs? Can you fix the faces? So I was a guy in a bullpen. And because of my background in advertising, I never missed a deadline. I've never missed a deadline in my life.
It's a brilliant training ground, actually, isn't it? Because it teaches you.
It does.
It does.
What that deadline is. So my ad agency, we had 4 clients. We had Maybelline, we had Pepsi, we had a medical thing called Medical Graphics, Medigraphics, and we had Bill Gold, who was a top movie poster producer in the world, and Mal Paso was the main client. It was Clint Eastwood's company. So if you were late with any of those, you were doomed.
Yeah, it'll never work again.
Right.
Yeah.
So when I started working up at Marvel, they started giving me all these odd books to ink. I drew Namor 39 or 37, I don't know which one. Like I was drawing and I was inking, I was doing Marvel Comics Presents, and every day I would go up there to work, somebody would inevitably stop by my desk and go, hey, I have this 48-page book called Nightcat. You want to ink it? It's breakdowns. We need it in a week. I'm like, yes. I would just take anything because I was like...
And this is what, 1990, 91?
This is 90, 91, yeah. And
right. Because that's a boom time at Marvel as well, isn't it? Because people kind of forget now that there was this exponential growth in comic book stores, comic books themselves. Marvel went from doing 20 books to 80 books or something in a very short period, Yeah. So did you feel like it was safe to make that jump from advertising, like comics was a place you could make a living?
I didn't do it right away, but I eventually worked into it. And I remember, when I left the advertising, I was like, okay, I have like steady books. I didn't feel it was the right thing to do until I got to the point where artists were asking for me to ink their work. So when that happened, not only was I getting work at Marvel, but anywhere these artists went, they would ask for me. So I was working for Marvel, DC, Dark Horse, everybody. And it was there when in San Diego, I remember I went to my first or second San Diego. I knew this guy, Rodney Ramos from New York. He was one of the artists. I inked him on some Toxic Avenger cover, I think, or something. But this was a time when the artists would come in to the studio, so I'd meet them. Also, I had John Romita over my shoulder. Anything I was screwing up, Johnny would come over and say, Jimmy, let's look at that hair a little bit more. Let's look at, Johnny was like the greatest guy, the sweetest man on earth. And he would just give me some advice, and everyone was extremely generous to me. It's probably why I'm that same way with people. Everyone was so like rooting for me to do well, and then I just started getting so much work. And at Second San Diego, I met Joe Quesada there, and Joe and I got along great. And at that time, I was also doing a thing where I did cover designs for the comics. Marvel would give me $40 a design. So I would do like little pencil roughs or pen and ink roughs of cover ideas. And they would give me like, we need a cover for this book, that book, and that book. And I would do them. And when they okayed them, they would give my design and hand it over to an artist to draw. I think it was because of my poster design skills and stuff like that. I was able to do stuff that was a little out of the ordinary.
And did you come up with the concept entirely? You'd do the cover concept?
Yeah, I would do the concept. I would do a little design and give it to an artist, and then an artist would blow it up, So I got
Cameron Infantino used to do that as well. Cameron Infantino used to, even when he was publisher, he would do layouts like that for somebody to come and do the cover.
It's
a very specific skill, isn't it? Because there's some great artists who do these covers where it's just the Hulk standing there or Batman standing looking out. It's like, who's going to buy this?
I am definitely a person that likes a storytelling cover.
Yeah,
we're still getting out of the poster phase where every cover is a guy standing there looking good. But, I think at the time they weren't doing poster type covers. So I was designing stuff that had like a lot of elements on it. I would mix things up a little bit. And I got to work with a lot of great artists, and again, Joe was one of them. Joe got some cover work up at Marvel because he's mostly a DC guy. And so while I was doing all that, I was also working on stuff with Joe, and we were lining up because the first book I inked over Joe, a complete book, was the Exo Zero book for Valiant. And again, another company where they heard of me. I was in the city. I met them at a party. You know that I'm a quite social person. Where we had our favorite bars in New York, where anybody that came from anywhere to New York, we'd make sure that they felt like there was a home at openers and the bars that we went to. It's like when Steve Dillon used to come in. I literally had a tab at the bar, and I would tell people, just go to the bar, have some drinks. They're on me. And the bartender, Noel, and the guys, Pat, and all those guys would know, okay, it's a friend of Jimmy's. Just give them his drinks. Make sure they eat something. That was my rule. Especially with Steve. I was like, Noel, I told Noel, I said, you can give him drinks all night until it closes. Make sure, get him a roast beef sandwich or a hamburger at some point. You have to feed him because he's not going to drink. He's not going to eat, and he's going to leave there like crap, But because of that,
the scariest thing in San Diego was always Steve Dillon knocking your door, wasn't it? Like, you'd maybe go to bed at 3 a.m. and at 3:15 you would hear a knock on your door, and it's Steve Dillon, and he's got 20 guys with him, and they want in your room to drink your minibar, So
I remember one night in San Diego, it was Brian Azzarello and Steve Dillon and a whole bunch of people, and I don't even want to say who it was, but one of the guys fell asleep. And all I know is he was completely Sharpied. Everyone drew on his face, on his arms, everything. It was you never want to go. You never want to be the first one to fall asleep with a group of guys in comics. That's for sure. But I mean, but it was definitely a lot of what I took a lot of my advertising skills, which was I was the guy that would meet clients and go out with clients and everything. So when I got into comics, I was extremely social, and I valued my downtime with people. So we'd go out for a drink, or we'd grab a meal, and we'd talk about the craft, or we'd talk about who we met and everything. And you make these connections, and then you start to see the things you have in common with people. Yeah. And I've always, I with all my comics, I pretty much have relationships with everybody that works on them. I know you do as well. And it's really important because people work harder when they want to prove to you, when they want to prove something. And, you and I both know this. You can tell when it's just a gig to somebody. They do the job. Yeah. They do okay, and it looks okay, and it's not their best thing. They don't really care, or they're looking for the money. And then you can tell when they really want to prove to you they're going to do something great, or will say, we're going to do this together. And you get a different level of work that it doesn't even compare to the last thing they did. Yeah. And I've always felt I'd rather do less comics that are great than more comics that are okay. And it's probably why the pace of what I do is a little slower than most people's. It's not as aggressive. I'm aggressive in a different way. But I'm talking to the guy right now, Mark, that, you're like the brick on a gas pedal as far as doing your own thing.
Funny. I do less work than anyone. It's weird because
today. Yeah. Let's go back 5 years, shall we?
No. I've maintained the same pace for 30 years. It's crazy. I only do about 20 books a year. I do like 20, 22 books a year. But it weirdly feels like a lot because I never stay on a book too long.
Right.
So like if you do a 5-year run or something, that's all you're doing for those 5 years, But I do a 4-issue run, a 6-issue run. Right. So it always looks like I'm doing tons of stuff, but I'm actually quite lazy, Like I used to see Brian Bendis, and he would be doing 6 or 7 books a month, and I just couldn't do it.
Yeah, some of the guys I always felt like they just found out they have a year to live, and they're trying to get 1,000 things out, and I've slowed down. I've also my artists have also slowed down in a way. But I there was a time when I was reevaluating everything in the 90s. I mean, when Joe and I formed the Event Comics and Image Comics happened, and I started seeing myself getting screwed on deals, or having like even a thing like all the Marvel TV shows that based on the Marvel Nights, they didn't even give me a thank you in them. Like stuff like that drove me insane. Yeah. And I would try to talk at least to people that I liked. I'd say, hey, there's another way to do this if you want to, maybe make a career out of comics instead of just existing in comics,
But see, to go back a little bit, like the fact that you left advertising to work in comics is interesting because Neil Adams, Carmine Infantino, a lot of these amazing guys, started in advertising. And back in the day, especially, you could make a ton of money in advertising compared to comics.
Yeah.
What was the draw? Like, because advertising's a respectable job as well, and comics, especially in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, was not respectable. It wasn't something that people would be impressed by usually. No. I mean, whereas advertising, you're Don Draper, aren't you?
Right, but you're also in advertising, you're nobody. Meaning your studio does things, right? You don't put your name on things. I've worked on campaigns I'm extremely proud of, but only I know what they are. I've done stuff for Nike that I know that, okay, well, that's mine up there. That's all mine.
Yeah.
But when advertising, it's not about being pat on the back or even getting the credit for it, because you work with a studio of people. And even if you're the lead man on it, it's about your crew. So it's a different kind of thinking, where in comics, you have to put your name on it, what you do. So if you suck, they know that that sucks, because your name's right there. The ad campaign, if it's great, everybody gets credit. If it's terrible, nobody cares. It's on to the next thing. But when a comic that sucks lasts forever. It's in somebody's collection.
And your peers all know who you are as well.
Of course.
Advertising, it's not the same club, isn't it? It's not the same where everybody knows what everybody else is doing. Comics, we're all fans as well as creators, aren't we?
There were a lot more women in advertising than there were in comics. When I got into comics, there was like 3 girls. 3 women working, and Marie Severin I met when I was younger, and Hildy Mesnick was one of my editors, and Hildy actually introduced me to Amanda, at some point. But like social-wise, my advertising was a lot more social job as far as boy and girl type stuff, But comics was all about, it was a bunch of guys drinking Mountain Dew at 4:30 in the morning and trying to hit a deadline. There's a certain charm to those times, because we felt like we could do anything, and at the same time, it felt like we were breaking out of the mold of what everybody else has been doing. Now, I'm a guy that I love Neil Adams. Neil was actually Amanda's dad worked with Neil Adams in advertising, but Neil was the guy I would go up to and ask for advice all the time, and he always had a ton of it. And I would look at guys like Joe Kubert. I would talk to Joe Kubert all day long about not his DC stuff, I talk about the stuff he did himself, like the stuff that he put out, his books, everything from Jew Gangster to all his books, right? And I saw a guy that was doing his own stuff, and then I would see Paul Galassi or Don McGregor, and I would talk about Saber, and I'd be like, how did you guys publish that? Like, how did that work? How did you distribute that? I was so inspired by these guys, and when Image came, it seemed like, I remember Joe and I talking and said, we could do that. How much money do we need to do that? And we realized it wasn't that we needed that much money. We needed that much focus. And we also needed to understand that we're not getting paid till later and yada, 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 right? But these kind of things, that was the times, that was the 90s were like a crazy time, because you could do anything. Then I mean, look, we did not only did with Event Comics, we did Marvel Nights, and that was like another crazy thing. And again,
what year was Event Comics? Was Event Comics about 94, 95?
Yeah, it was 94, 95.
Because that was actually a bit of a tough time though in comics, wasn't it? Because you remember, the way comic goes in peaks and troughs.
Yeah.
You'd had that explosion from about 1983 with Frank Miller coming in and everything, all the way up through Dark Knight, Watchmen and everything. And then the apex of it all really was Image, wasn't it? Image, like comic guys were suddenly millionaires. Life was good, it was amazing. Yeah. But then remember the market really went into a slowdown around about 94, 95 or something, Yeah. Did you guys catch the tail end of that amazing time in terms of numbers and everything?
Yeah, so I never really worried about what the rest of the market was doing, because I felt like they're going to buy what we do maybe. And it's that arrogance, that youthful arrogance. Whatever we do, it's going to be great. But I think we did pretty good numbers. Ash did very well, and Painkiller Jane did very well. We had steady, our biggest problem was getting the books done, because we were 2 guys and we had Laurie Braddock, who was, kind of like being the publisher, but not really being a good police officer for us. And, the company was dependent on getting constant product out. People wanted something every month. And it's kind of tough to do. Back then it was a little tough to do. And, Joe's never been known as a monthly guy. The guy, his work is so detailed. how the hell could he do? I mean, look at the work. It's he was better. We should have probably said Ash was every other month. It would have been a smarter move. But looking back, I mean, what happened with Event Comics is we took, again, my advertising background. We would drive up to Wizard Magazine, upstate New York, and we would take them to lunch, and then we made sure we were in that magazine. When we launched that book, it was all about Ash and Painkiller Jane.
Oh, I remember as a fan, like Wizard was. I mean, you guys were in it every month. It was unreal. You guys were treated like a Marvel or DC or something. You were right up at the front of the magazine all the time.
Right. A lot of that was going up there in person. It was a lot of gifting some Wizard covers to some owners, and it was about creating a relationship with the guys where they felt they wanted to push us. They wanted us to be successful because we saw them and we hung out with them and we threw parties, a lot of parties and stuff like that. But that's my advertising background, right? You take the client out to dinner, you get them a great dinner, whatever, you show them a good time. And Wizard Magazine was always looking for something new and exciting that they could push. And it's funny because, how we got the Marvel Knights deal was from Gareb Shamus, because Gareb actually...
I didn't know this.
Gareb actually... there was the then president of Marvel was Joe Calamari, and he met with Gareb Shamus, and Gareb, he was telling Gareb that problems they're having, because, they were eventually going to go Chapter 11, the sales weren't there and everything. And Gareb said, you should talk to these guys. They live in the city, and look at the following they have and everything. And that's how we got a meeting with Joe Calamari.
So they called you? They called you?
Yeah, they called me. They called me, actually. And Joe called, and we went up to the office, and they said, we did Heroes Reborn. We don't want another one of those because it didn't work out. I don't know what happened with it. And we came back to them and said, well, we can do 4 books. But we need an office in the building, and that's when they gave us the penthouse of Marvel Comics. We got the penthouse, but we came back with our demands. They came back with their demands, and we put Event on hold to do the Marvel Knights. And it's basically, at its core, it was Joe and I wanted to show them that the books could be better if you get the people that really love the characters on them. It's not just a job. You should get the right people on the right books,
it's just common sense, but I remember at the time thinking it was so interesting because the secret sauce, the formula that you guys had for Marvel Knights was even on a C-list character, putting a great writer and a great artist, which sounds so obvious, but people weren't doing that for such a long time. But I always wondered, was there any weird feeling from the Marvel guys in the office? Because you're sharing an elevator with these guys, right? Oh. But the idea that you basically are saying, right, give me your lame characters nobody cares about, and we'll make them outsell your A-list characters that everybody cares about. What was it? Was there any friction?
There was friction. There was a lot of processing for them to do with us being in the building. The good news was I knew the bullpen already. They all know me. I was up there. I'd go out with them at night drinking. We'd have great dinners, and I knew 90% of the people up there. So I would walk down and, hey, Jimmy, what's going on? I'd always hang out there. So me having an office with Joe upstairs, not so bad for them. The editors were not loving it because they felt we were given more room to do new things. And it was true. I mean, we went in and asked for more money per budget on the book.
Yes, rates were better, weren't they, Marvel, right?
Right. But we had a rule. We would not take any artists or talent that they were using. So that was number 1 rule. Okay? Number 2 was between Joe and I, we only going to hire people we know. Pretty much. Right? And that's why Mark Texeira did Black Panther. That was the guy I went to high school. Of course I hired Mark. Right? We hired friends. Steve and Garth were buddies, so of course we're going to hire Steve and Garth,
Getting Garth Ennis and Steve Dillon on The Punisher was the most inspired move, wasn't it? Because I think Garth is a genius, right? He's probably my favourite comic book writer just now. Yeah. But he's not the sort of guy you're going to put on Spider-Man or Green Lantern or he's got no interest at all. So to find the one thing in the industry that Garth could write for the next 20 years.
Yeah, well, Garth is brilliant. Let's get that. Yeah. I also love him as a friend. Like, he's a great friend. I love hanging out with him. We just have the same bad sense of humor and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. But we knew reading. Joe and I were fans of Preacher, And we're like, if you can look how badass that is, look how violent that is. If you could bring that to Punisher, you know, and it's funny because it was like we had like a lot of things going on at the same time. We had Tim Bradstreet, who I loved, and I said, Tim, you want to do these Punisher covers? And I talked to him. He had a crazy rate, and I said, I can't pay you that. I said, but I guarantee you these covers are going to make your career. Like, you do these covers, it's going to be, you know. And I talked him into it, and and it wasn't much less. It was like a couple $100 less. But he was like, and then of course we gave him the raise later on. So he made a. But it was like we just said, imagine, you know, just imagine Garth and Steve doing. Imagine Kevin Smith writing, Daredevil. Imagine Christopher Priest doing Black Panther. It was like these kind of simple things that were just like, okay. And, you know, we wanted to brand the books. So that's why we did the Marvel Knights thing. We wanted the label on the books to be different. That's my advertising background. That's Joe's advertising background. We needed people to say, these books look different than the other books. And we had guys like Brian Haberlin doing full-on computer coloring, and we just wanted to create a brand within the brand, and that was our goal.
Understand, you know, if you're a relatively new reader as well, is the context of when Marvel Knights happened too. Like, comics in Hollywood was dead. I mean, this was a couple of years after Batman and Robin, which was a disaster in '97. You know, there was no superhero movies really in development. You know, there was rumors and stuff, but nothing was really happening.
Right.
No Hollywood guys were working in comic books.
No,
and we the market had been depressed probably about 4 years at this point. You know, so that slowdown in the mid-90s it got so bad to the point where I think I was reading like 2 books a month if I was lucky across the whole industry by this point, you know?
Yeah.
So you guys were such a shocking thing to be happening because it had just been sliding and bad news, and then suddenly you guys come in. And am I right? Is Guardian Devil the first of the Marvel Knights books? Was that the first one?
Was the first one, yeah.
And that suddenly everybody was like, Kevin Smith had exploded onto the scene. There was a rumor he was a comic fan, you know, because there was a lot of comic references in his work. And then you guys bagged him. Like, what was the story behind that? Because I mean, how do you convince somebody to come into what was essentially a dead industry at that point?
So Kevin, we helped, you know, so through a friend, another friend, Kevin Smith was filming Mallrats, and he needed some artwork, and Joe and I did a piece for him, and then he did Chasing Amy right after, and he needed to create a fake comic convention in this hotel that was closed for the winter, and we brought the Event Comics booth there, and Joe and I sat there, and he says, "Okay, you guys want to? I think we're going to open the movie with you guys talking, and then a girl comes up for an autograph." And they shot that. They only showed it once. They never used it in the movie. But it was a whole opening with me and Joe doing a whole dialogue. Thank God it's cut it out. That's all. I thank you, Kevin, for cutting it out. But anyway, we became friends with Kevin. And Kevin always made it clear that he loved to do Daredevil. He loved Daredevil and he loved Harley Quinn. Like, so much so his daughter is named Harley, right? He loved Harley Quinn. But anyway, with Daredevil, he's like, I always wanted to do Daredevil, blah, blah, blah. So when Marvel Knights came, you know, I was like, okay, you know, Joe and I were both talking, and we're like, sorry, I'm just going to turn my phone off. We were both talking, and we thought, you know, we remembered what Kevin said, and we approached him for it, and that was our big get. He said, I want to do it. And of course, you know, both of us were like, fantastic. And when we pitched that as part of the Marvel Knights thing, they were like, fantastic. And, you know, Kevin did something that nobody's ever done in comics. He went on TV shows and talked about comics.
Yeah.
He went on late night shows. Joe and I did a morning show in New York, like one of these ABC morning shows talking about comics. And we sat there and we said, we have to somehow make comics cool. Like, we have to make them cool again. Or at least we need the rest of the world to see how cool these characters are the way we see them. Because back then it was still like, yeah, you do comic books, you know. It was sort of like, I'm a puppeteer, you know. It gets the same response in the bar. Nobody cares, right? And so we spent a lot of time trying to think, like, how do we put this image forward of comics are cool and not just for kids. Yeah. Of course, getting Kevin was a big deal with that. I remember we were at we did a signing for Daredevil in Los Angeles, and one of the guys online, he brought his Daredevil book and some other comics Joe and I worked on. And I looked at him and I said, "You're John Singleton, the director." And he goes, "Yeah, man." And I'm like, "What are you doing here?" And he's like, "I'm getting my comics signed. I love your books." And John invited Amanda and I to every opening he had for every one of his movies, every premiere. And I was at one of them, and I knew Marvel Knights was making an impact because I was at one of the after parties. I think it was for Baby Boy or one of his movies. And Wesley Snipes came up to me, and he said, "I heard you're the guy to talk to about Marvel movies." And I'm like, I'm not. I'm actually just doing this. He goes, no, but you're doing Black Panther comics, right? And I said, yeah, I'm the editor, one of the editors on it. And he says, and Wesley goes, well, let's go outside. I want to talk to you. And took me outside the party. He goes, okay, I want to be Black Panther. He goes, I know I was just Blade, but I want to be Black Panther. You're going to make that happen for me. And I'm like, all I could do is just call Avi the next day and say, hey, look, you should get in touch with Wesley. But I knew at that moment, I'm like, okay, something's happening. Like, I have these movie people coming up to me, knowing who I am, knowing who Joe is, and saying, hey, you know what? I want to play that part. It's it was just, everything's changed. Everything changed after that.
Round about the same time, I remember seeing at San Diego, I saw Harry Knowles having breakfast across the table. And I'm sitting with my friends, and I saw Harry Knowles, and I saw Robert Rodriguez talking to him, and standing behind Robert Rodriguez was Kevin Smith.
Yeah.
And standing behind him was Bryan Singer. And they were all waiting to talk to him. And I thought, this is fascinating. There's something happening in culture shifting here. This was summer 2000 San Diego, I remember, and I'll never forget it. It was like they were the three kings coming to see the baby Jesus.
Yeah,
there was something changed.
We had all those kind of crazy things. I remember I was in Vancouver in a hotel, and I had Bryan Singer. Is that it? Bryan Singer, the director, right? And I just hear somebody yell, "Hey, Jimmy Palmiotti!" And I was like, "Who's it?" And he comes up, and I'm like, "Who's this guy?" And he's like, "Yeah, I'm Bryan Singer. I do the X-Men movies." I was like, "Oh, what? Okay, hi." I was like, I didn't know what to say. I'm like, "Why do you want to talk to me?" That happened a lot, like that, because of Marvel Knights. It's like, and again, we went out and pushed those books, and I think on some level what it did was, and especially this is mostly Kevin. All of a sudden, it was okay for a celebrity to say, you know what, I read comics my whole life, and I love this. I mean, we already know Spielberg did, we already know Lucas did, obviously. But when you see the actors saying, oh, man, I love Iron Man, or I love this character, it was like a brand new thing. And there
was guys faking it as well. Do you remember there was guys who then realised this could be a good career move?
Yeah.
So guys would go and get their assistant to bring in a bunch of comics for them to read and try and gen up on it a little bit.
Yeah.
So that's around about 2001, 2002, when these things were really starting to make money.
They were. And again, the industry was changing. Marvel was getting out of Chapter 11, right? And then they did the big sale to Disney and all that stuff. But it was also the time where I felt like, okay, we did Marvel Night. We did what we wanted to do. And it was time to move on because I don't own those characters, right? And Joe and I had a different goal. Like, Joe wanted to stay and become the editor-in-chief, and I was like, great. And so I went and I wanted to do more writing. So I kind of said, all right, I need to do that. I need people to not, well, I had to stop inking because I was still doing inking work. Like, I had to do writing, I had to honestly go cold turkey with my other work and focus on my writing. And I was lucky enough to get...
I'd be great at two things, that was the best advice I was ever given, which is this: you can't be a great drummer and a great guitarist. You have to hone your skill, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, I was lucky because I was given like a run of Deadpool, and then I got Jonah Hex up at DC, and I did over 100 issues of that, with Justin Gray, which is a good buddy of mine, and I got lucky because I did what most people don't do now is I did a giant runs of things, Jonah Hex and again, Power Girl, and then eventually, working with Amanda on Harley Quinn, which was a big deal, and all the time putting out my own books and getting my own properties out there, and It's just
Jimmy,
a lot
to
of
go back
stuff.
and listen to it, I've known you over 20 years and I've never actually asked this, but was there a moment you were going to work at Marvel? Were you ever going to kind of go internal, once, Joe had become editor-in-chief? Were you ever going to follow into that role as well, or were you always interested in going off and doing your own thing?
No, I was offered that job in a lot of companies.
Yeah.
I turned down all of them. I never wanted when we did Event Comics, we babysat ourselves.
Yeah.
When we did Marvel Knights, we had to babysit 4 teams on books, and sometimes us on as well. I felt like, and maybe it's, I don't know, I had like an older soul, but I felt like the more time I spend with other people's things, it's less of my own, and I just felt like I wasn't. I think both Joe and I won an Eisner for being best editor back then, and for me that was like the sign, like, okay, that's it. Like, so what do? You win more of these later on? Like, I don't want any more best editor things, because I always felt like it's sort of like I have this creative muscle to flex, and whether it's drawing or writing. And if I take a job on just for money, then I'm working. Yeah. Eventually, I'm working for money. I don't want it. If I work for a corporation, eventually they'll screw me, or a contract will run out, or I'll retire. And what do I have to look back on? I don't want it. And I just felt like I only had a certain amount of time. And you understand this more than anybody. I feel like all my stories are in here. It's like a big full parking lot. And I need to get those cars out to make room for new ones. And I just felt I had all these ideas. And if I took on a job just for money, or just for fame, or just for any kind of, or I just want to be the boss of things, it's going to destroy my writing career. It's going to destroy me being creative. And
did you consider it though? Was it something you really considered? Like, or was it pretty straight up? You were just out there and you were going to go off and do your own thing?
I was offered, like, in between a Marvel Knights and maybe like 5 years later, I was offered a job to run a company out in LA. It was a movie studio, and it was very nice. But I told them, I said, I understand why you want me to do it. I said, but I don't really have a desire to be the guy running it. I want to be the person making the things. I don't want to be. I don't want to be an actor in a movie. I want to be the director or the writer. I don't want fame. Has no attraction to me. It has is downsides in a weird way. I love comic book fame. Nobody cares who you are anywhere except at a convention. It's fantastic.
As Rob Liefeld said something similar to me years ago, and he said that when he was running a company, he said he was doing the thing that he didn't want to be doing, which was managing people and looking at accounts and everything, whereas what he wanted to do was sit and create stuff, and so you must have had a similar vibe then,
I did. And also, you play to your strengths. Joe was he's a great artist, right? He was a great editor-in-chief. I mean, he really enjoyed that job, and I probably would not have enjoyed it. And so I'm like, because everybody's different. Everybody's got a different thing they do. Joe, I was very proud of Joe, all those years at Marvel, he did a great job. I was proud of Dan DiDio. He was a neighbor of mine. He was my next door neighbor before he even got into comics.
I knew you had a connection to Dan, so how far back with Dan DiDio do you go?
I go back to the mid-90s. If you look at some of the parties we threw and you look in people's photos, there's this guy with a full head of hair and a mustache. It looked like Dr. Phil running around in the background. But Dan was a guy that I had a local comic shop in Brooklyn I went to, and he was there buying comics, and we just hit it off one day. We grabbed a bite to eat, and then I found out he lived next door in the apartment building next door to mine.
I mean, what's so weird to me is, like, Detroit used to make cars, and it feels like the New York area is just comic book people. It seems amazing.
When I grew up in a neighborhood called the Midwood section of Brooklyn. I grew up in.
Yeah.
And they used to say there's something weird in the water there, right? Yeah. Because my neighborhood had Neil Diamond, Barbra Streisand, Carole King, and Woody Allen, all from my neighborhood.
That's crazy.
And you think, and they used to say there must be something in the water here because how many artists came out of Brooklyn? Fazetta, Al Williamson, all these kind of guys.
Well, you saw that school that Stan Lee went to. Did you ever see the school?
No, it was Stan from Brooklyn.
Absolutely crazy. Bob Kane went to the school. I think Bill Finger went to the school. This is the same high school.
Was it in Brooklyn?
Yeah, I think so. I'm pretty sure it's Brooklyn. I'll double check that. It's called something like the Clinton something. I can't remember the name of the high school.
It's probably in Brooklyn. You know, I think what it was it was lower middle class, and I think it a lot of people dream when they grew up of escaping it or other worlds or other things, and lost themselves in that kind of thinking. And I think that had a lot to do with people wanting to break free from where they were. And if you look at what we do, I mean, it literally is like our brain goes somewhere else, you know.
But there's poor people all over the world, you know. I mean, there's something really strange about that. Like Stan Lee's classmates were like Burt Lancaster and Calvin Klein as well. I think they were there at the same time. You know, so it's weird.
Maybe it's the universe shooting that talent ray in one area. Yeah. Who knows? You know. I just like I said. I think you know, people say that so many people want to do comics, and I said, but it is a small group compared to the population of the planet. It's a very small group, and then we have so many talented artists in comics. And you know, I'm in awe when I walk around and I see all these artists drawing, and I'm just like, God, I don't have 1/8 the talent that person has, but I do have marketing skills and I do have these other skills, you know, and you realize as you get older, you're like, okay, so you can't do everything, but there's things you do better. And there's also, I always say, I don't sit and think about yesterdays. It's never been a policy of mine. I think it's done. It happened already. I'm always thinking about today and tomorrow.
Yeah. So
you know, conventions are great if you want to be reminded of what you've done. People throw a stack of books in front of you, and you're like, "Are you sure I did that one?" And they're like, "Yeah, you did that." And I'm like, oh, "Okay." And I just never saw that cover. You know, I think that we're in a business of we're all excited about what we want to do tomorrow. And again, getting back to what we were talking about, I was offered a lot of jobs. I remember sitting with somebody at Warner Brothers, asking me, would you like to have this job where you do this and that? And I kept saying, but how does that make me happy? And they're like, what do you mean? I said, well, how does that job make me happy? I said, so I help this and that does that. And I said, I just don't, like, how am I involved? How am I adding to the process? And they're like, well, you're managing things. And I'm just like, yeah, you know, I said, I'd rather own the store than manage the store, you know?
I think you would be a good leader within somewhere like DC. I mean, I think you running DC would have been amazing. You know, like, did they ever approach you? Was there ever a moment where that was talked about?
Yes, a couple of times. Just basically, you know, one of the times was offering me a job where I was a liaison between, like, I would be, like, if I wanted to be the person between Warner Brothers and DC, like weird jobs like that. You know,
That's a perfect fit for you, actually. Because you have such an interest in both.
It would have done well for my friends.
Right.
Because I would have hired everyone I know. I have this policy about keeping my friends close to me and making sure they always have work and they always have something. I have a good loyalty about the people I work with. I want to always make sure they're okay. That's the Italian thing. I want to make sure everybody's taken care of. But I also understood, I would see it in the people running things. I'd see the stress levels they were under. Yeah. And I would see how they could get excited about doing something and then somebody walks in and goes, no.
Yes.
It's that. And, you know, I just, the idea of spending 6 months putting together teams of people to have somebody come in. I mean, that was Paul Levitz's job for a while. Walk in and go, no, that's not going to happen. Or hey, we got this great book we're doing. We don't want it. You know, like that kind of heartbreak to me, I just didn't want it. I always felt like if I was somebody in charge totally where I'd kind of be like, that dependency triangle, that triangle where I'd be fixing things, where there'd be the needy people that always need me to help and fix things. What do they call it? The drama triangle? I felt like I'd be at the top of the drama triangle all the time, and I'm not sure I can handle too much of that. I kind of love my life. I love that Amanda and I, we both do stuff we love. We travel and we have fun, and you'll never see a picture of Amanda and I disappointed or sad.
It's true. I mean, I guess you've always been your own boss. Like, I mean, I don't know if I ever told you this, but you were one of the reasons I started Millar World. Have I ever told you this?
I got to check your books for the big thank you in the back, I guess.
You do get a mention, actually, in one of them. It was Stan Lee. I'd interviewed Stan Lee, and Stan said to me, because I was sort of preening myself when I was talking to Stan and trying to impress him, and I was saying, 4 of the top 5 books. I'm writing 4 of the top 5 books at the moment. One of them was double shipping.
Wow.
And Stan was like, yeah, but this will all go away at some point. And I was like, what? And he explained how the business works. When you're working at Marvel or DC, you're in for a while, then you're out, And he said, it's important, you should do your own thing. And he said, you're good at original creations, like the concepts you've got would work as movies. He said, you should try and do something, that could be your own, that you could maybe turn into a movie one day. And literally in the same week, you'd said to me, you need to do your own Preacher. You said, Garth, has created his own thing that will always be there. You need your Preacher. You've never done anything that you've left behind.
I remember Garth talking about you before I met you.
Yeah.
Of course, saying nice things. And then you started doing work and everything. And I do remember, because I saw you, we were in a bar. I think we were in a bar. And I saw you, and I think I told the man, I said, I'm going to make a point of talking to Mark, because he needs to step away now from this stuff, because he's got his own ideas. He needs to step away. Otherwise, he's just going to stuck being that guy that does that character,
Yes.
And I do remember speaking with you about it, because I felt like you were ready. Like, that was your time. That was your time to do it. Because when you're on top, that's the time to do it. It's because you step away and you get this. It's like there's a point. Like a career is a roller coaster. It's a giant roller coaster, up and down, up and down, up and down, right? But when you're up, you got this crazy little power thing that you can get stuff done quicker. And people are trying to get you to work for them. You could just get things done. When you're down, it's a little tougher, right? Because people, I got this other guy I'll give my attention to. And I just felt with everything you were doing, that was your perfect time to do it. And, I've had that talk with a couple of people. And, Stan, I used to talk to Stan all the time, because Stan used to say, hey, what are you doing now? And I would hand him a couple of books, and he would go, that's good. You're doing your own stuff. That's smart. You don't want to get stuck doing this thing forever, whatever. It's important, I think, but you have to realize, and I realize, not every creator can do it. And not every artist wants to write. I used to think every artist wants to write, and I realized that's not true. I have a couple of friends that they're like, I don't want to do it, you do it. But I think because we're not a big business in a way, right? We're able to get away with doing things a little easier than most other businesses. We're not under the scrutiny of a billion eyes. Like, film business is tough. You make a film, you know this. Everyone and their mother has something to say about it. Even when you're making the film, you're working with 300 people that have opinions. You've been on set where they suck up to you the first day, and then the second day you hear, oh God, when is this guy going to leave? And I've been on sets where I'm like, is there a better way we can do this? And they're like, well, you should talk to this guy who needs to talk to that guy. I've had scripts I've written where there, it was a clean script, and by the time I flew into Vancouver, it was colored blue, the script, which means it was changed twice since I left. Like things you learn that, oh my God, comics are so easy. I can write a comic, and then this person draws it, and then I have it lettered and colored, and there it is. That exactly the way I wanted it.
Yeah. And if you can own it as well, then there's nobody can even edit it, which is wonderful as well.
Yeah, I mean, I look, you have had unbelievable success with your IP, and there's not another person like you with this kind of success. There isn't. You're number one. You're number one. I'm number 38, right? And what I try to do is get to 36 and then to 30 and then to 20. Like
I think you're the king of the concept, too. I think you've got really great concepts. And it's funny, like you say, not everybody can do it. And this is no slight to anyone because every skill set is its own valuable thing, you know, but there's some guys who are amazing at doing company-owned Marvel and DC characters, you know, amazing at it, way better than me, but they struggle when they do their own concepts. And it's like the difference between being a runner and a pole vaulter or something, isn't it? It's such a different thing. But you're great at coming up with the new thing that's got a great hook that people understand. It's simple, you know.
I'm still learning because I'm a later in life writer and not trained. So I'm still learning. But I do tend to write the stuff I want to read, and I think we all do. Because the minute we say I'm going to write something so somebody buys it is when it's shit. It turns to shit.
There was a guy I knew who used to always, a comic guy who used to always try and anticipate the next trend. And he used to always have his theories and they'd say, here's what everybody's going to be into next year. And I was like, what are you into now? Write about what you're interested in now instead of what you think people will like next year.
I had my ex before, Amanda. She was a singer and she, had a band, and 22 Brides was the name of the band. And she would always look at what was like big then and say, I want to be like that. And I said, no. Go backwards. Do what you do and let them catch up to you. But, I do with the Kickstarters and the crowdfunding stuff. I kind of just write the books. I'm a heavy metal kid. So I'm like, I kind of write the stuff that's a little naughty and a little crazy. And I write it for myself. And I hope I find an audience with it. As far as the multimedia stuff, it's a lot tougher because I've had so many, and you understand this, I've had so many development deals that have gone bad. And I've been through so many agents, I'll probably be through more of them because they're either not aggressive enough or they don't understand the property or they went for that one property of mine and that's what they wanted and everything else was like, well, no, I'm going to focus on that. So it's like, it's real. That end is real. I've had a lot of craziness with because I haven't found the one person that gets it totally and is able to knock it out of the park. But until that happens, it doesn't matter. I still have to write my books and still have to do my books. And I put it on myself. I want to do at least 4 to 6 new properties a year. And still do work for other people. I still do minor stuff. I'm doing a book for Todd McFarlane, Deadly Tales of Gunslinger, which is an ongoing. Yeah, and that's ongoing. Starts in November, and that's Todd just coming up to me and goes, "Hey, well, actually, it was Thomas Healy, but he's like, you know how to draw, you know how to write westerns, right? Why don't you write the Gunslinger in the Old West?" And I'm like, "Can I do anything I want?" He's like, "Of course." And I'm like, "Great." It's kind of fun to work with Todd. I mean, he's one of my heroes, and so how cool, So it is a great business, and it's a tough business. And like I said, with right now, crowdfunding is a little tough because we have major companies doing it now, and there's a lot of money being, spent on known properties, and a little less money being spent on new properties.
Because guys who were relatively new to the industry were raising really significant sums of cash. You know, it was really impressive over the last 2 or 3 years. But it does feel a very crowded market now, doesn't it? Like it did feel there was just a handful of guys doing it, and then suddenly out of nowhere, you've got the publishers jumping in and everything. I love what Eric July's done. I think what Eric July's done is incredible in a relatively short space of time. But also a bunch of guys have been doing that as well. But I think the future of any business is diversifying, so I don't think it's the future, but I think it's a useful thing that's there, but I don't think it's where everybody's going to be in 5 years' time because the market couldn't possibly sustain that many people doing that many things. But where do you see crowdfunding at the moment then? Because you're in the middle of it, you've been doing it.
So I've been doing it since 2011. I think I'm one of the first pros to do a Kickstarter. And
if you don't mind, I know it's all public, so I feel I can ask you, but what kind of numbers in terms of financials were coming back that early, when people didn't really know what crowdfunding was? Early campaigns did?
I think the first one I did was a book called Queen Crab, and I don't remember, but it was like 10 or 15,000. It wasn't a lot of money. I didn't need a lot of money, and I literally sold the book to Image at the same time. So they did a hardcover.
Right.
Everyone backed it. got a signed one with a print. They got something different than what Image was selling.
Was it a graphic novel? Was it?
It was a graphic novel. Yeah, it was a hardcover graphic novel. And for me they average around maybe 48 to 70 to 80,000 per book, unless they do like an art book or something. It goes up. Yeah. But I've done 25. I've delivered every one of them on time. Yeah. I don't have a single person that has a complaint about. Meaning, I deal with Patrick, my buddy, and I deal with every issue that comes up with shipping. We make sure everybody's happy. So my future with it is going to be steady because I have steady customers. I have a lot of the same people. They do it 3 or 4 times a year with me. They buy everything I do. Great. Yeah. Okay. At some point in the next year or two, I'm going to probably repackage everything I've done and put them out through a distributor. Right. It'll be different. There'll be different covers. It won't be what the Kickstarters are. I want the people that got the Kickstarter, obviously they're signed books, they have prints, different formats, and I never reuse covers, right? So at some point, but I'm going to wait a year or two because I have a little plan, unless I get hit by a bus, then that goes out the window. But I see the future of comics is getting tougher. It's getting tougher all the time, especially when Marvel and DC aren't doing great, or they're not doing great things. They what they do lately is they rehash everything. And anybody that's now to a 20-year-old, it maybe doesn't feel like that. But for guys like us, we've seen it all at this point, And so it comes down to, well, who's doing it for us, right? Who's going to do the book? Then I'll buy it. And or if that artist is great, I'm going to buy it. But I think the publishing is always going to keep changing. It's been doom and gloom forever. As long as we've been doing it, there's somebody saying the business is going to go out of business. It's like a constant thing. So I think what happens, what's most important right now, is a body of work and a name. And I think that's the superpower you have in this business. If you built up a reputation and a name, or a consistency of work, of good work, I think that's the only way. I think I think it's getting tougher. And I think if they made a wizard list from 30 years ago, now, we would still see Jim Lee and Greg Capullo and Rob Liefeld.
Yeah, you're right.
and Joe Quesada, and we'd still see the Garth Ennis and the Grant Morrison. We'd still see a lot of these same names hitting that top 10 list. And that to me is like some really mind screw, because I'm like, wow, I would have never thought 30 years later the same guys would still be a lot of the same players. Yourself included.
That's like Jean-Claude Van Damme still being the biggest movie star.
Right. He'd still be doing a split between 2 buses or something. But, it's interesting to me. It's an interesting thing. And Neil Gaiman would be on it still. And, it's like, and you're like saying, well, oh my God, like, that's really weird in a way, it's really strange.
And it never happened in comics before, like the 30 years since the 90s when all of those guys come on the scene, or even earlier, the 80s, that's like in the 90s guys from the 50s or early 60s still being the main guys. That is an atrophied culture, isn't it? That's a really good perspective on it.
I mean, Neil Adams was, late 60s till the day he died. He was doing books, Joe Kubert never went out of fashion, No,
but to be the entire industry, though, almost, I mean, there are chinks of light in there, though, there's new guys coming through, but I think comics always seems to have had, a good decade and then a tough decade. That tends to be the way it goes, doesn't it? There's always a bunch of new guys come in and reinvent the wheel, and I feel we're sort of very close to that. Like, you can see things, you hear rumours in the background and everything. Yeah, something's going to explode again.
I see a lot of new companies pop up with interesting stuff, but a lot of it, and you can correct me, a lot of it feels like pitches to me. Yeah. Or they're trying to just...
I mean, saying that though, Jimmy, I get that all the time. And like, what is the difference between a good story that's a film and a good story that's a comic?
For me, it's just if I care,
a good story, So,
if I care about the characters, I feel like something's at stake.
But I remember people would say to me, "Oh, Wanted was just a movie pitch," and I was like, are you out of your mind? Like, the guy's the most unlikable character ever in fiction, you know?
Right.
You couldn't even get a Batman movie made at that time, never mind an independent comic, you know? But it's just a story's a story, isn't it?
No, a story. Look, it's everybody has a personal thing that they look at, like why something's good. We've read a million Batmans, we've read a million Supermans. I have no interest in those characters, really. I mean, and if somebody's, the pitches I've had at DC from Marvel and DC have always been about going outside the box. It's probably why they don't ever pick them half the time, because it's something that I'm trying to think of something that I haven't seen before. But I like, I'm not saying less about the comics, more about the companies. Like a lot of companies are formed to try to sell. They're getting all their money so they can sell the IP. We had a couple of big ones and they went out of business, and then there's some newer ones, and they might, they have to go for their second round of pitch meetings to raise money.
Well, I think we were a tasty example, of like a company that was sold to a bigger company, like the way Marvel was in DC back in the 60s. And I think a lot of people are trying to jump on that sort of thing, which we never planned. We were just doing comics, but then we suddenly had studios bidding for our company.
Right. I mean, look, you made a move that was, not done before. You made a...
Also very relevant to its time, because Marvel was so on the up at that point that everybody wanted the next Marvel. And we sold in 2017. 2019, you had Marvel peak. And then Marvel's movies have been in serious decline for the last 5 years, So to the point where I don't even know how many of them are profitable now.
Well, I will say I have a perspective on Marvel movies. The reason a thing like Deadpool does so well, right? And the reason is that audience, that those young people that bought into all the Marvel movies and now in their 20s and 30s, and they want more mature themes and they want more adult movies. They think they want the basic stuff that they had when they were younger. They don't. They want it to age with them a little appropriately more. So I think the time for R-rated movies with comic stuff is coming. I think that's going to be a big thing for the next couple of years. But the future of publishing, I think it's going to be the same as it always is. People are going to buy who they like. They'll try new things. Somebody's going to package stuff the right way. What Marvel and DC does is they find a couple more creators to repackage everything and do another launch every 2 or 3 years. It's been consistent forever, It scares away collectors in a way. Comic collectors are less and less because there's no consistency in characters. But they're appealing to, they're trying to, they're trading formats and stuff. I don't think there's any clear answer. For me, I think I look forward to when I can get a program that works like Kickstarter and put it on my own website. So I don't need a second person, third, type of thing. But for me, I don't, I don't know what the future holds, because it looks like everybody's throwing everything against the wall to see what sticks right now.
But that's when something sticks. I think one thing about comic people is we love last minute rescues.
Yeah.
And we are creative, So I think that somebody will crack the code. I don't know who it's going to be, but probably somebody who's about 29 or 30 is going to reinvent the wheel. Historically, that's the way it works.
It's going to be accidental. I look at my career and I look at like Amanda and I on Harley Quinn, right? They gave us the book and told us it'll probably get canceled in 6 or 8 issues. So do whatever you want. And it was just a silly thing where Amanda and I said, well, Amanda's like, no woman wears the same outfit. Let's change her outfit all the time. And I'm like, well, I don't want to write a book about an abusive relationship. So let's have her break up with Joker and let's just start it that way. And it was just like these 2 little things. And then all of a sudden it's outselling Batman and JLA. And they're like, what the hell's going on? And I'm just like, that's not on purpose. That's an accident. That's just having creators that wanted to put their own touch on it and the company saying, well, we go ahead, do whatever you want. We don't think it's going to sell. And there is some kind of super energy in that thing where they give you a title that nobody cares about and you're able to pull a rabbit out of the hat with it. Jonah Hex, I never thought I'd be writing 120 issues of Jonah Hex.
Is that how long you were on that? 10 years?
It was like It was 70, 34, hardcover, specials. It was over 100 and something issues. But there was something there, and nobody was saying the movie helped, that's for sure. But the movie hurt. But that's a good question, actually. Do you think movies have helped comics? Do you think, because here's my thesis, right? I've got this theory that 35 to 55 was the golden age, 55 to 75 was the silver age. I know people say bronze age and all that, but it makes no sense. Yeah.
75 to 95 was the dark age. That was the period of all Alan Moore, Frank Miller, all that stuff. Right. But it started really with Steve Gerber and those guys back in the mid-70s, But then I'd say 95 to about 2015, I think, was the Hollywood age. That's when comics, with you guys, with Marvel movies, all this kind of thing, the comic guys, movie guys writing comics, characters you've never heard of becoming big Hollywood franchises and so on. I think those 20 years were those years, but I think we're about to explode into something new. I think.
Yeah, there were good years, movie years. Unfortunately, it was good for licensing, right? Licensing made the most money from these things. Unfortunately, in all those years, with all that money coming in, both companies never said, hey, you know what? We're going to, instead of giving you creators 5% of the share, we're going to give you 10% to split. And they never said, hey, you know what? We're going to give you medical coverage so you don't have to worry so much about shit. Or, you know what? We're not only going to give you a thank you, but we're going to throw you a couple of bucks. They had the opportunity to take care of the creators in this time. We had guys in charge that were comic creators themselves. This was the time that Neil Adams should have appeared and said, hey, guys, guess what? We're not going to do this unless you guys do all these things. And it didn't happen. And what happened was they actually pushed everybody with a decent amount of talent to go other places because of it. It would have been so easy to keep all the creators happy. It would have been minimal costs for the studios. And they would have gotten how many new projects and things out of them. And
because they've run out of stuff to adapt. All the really great stuff has been adapted, really. I know everybody will hate this in the comments section. But they could have had some amazing stuff for the next 10 years, but they just run out and they started adapting.
All they had to do was, again, growing up with no money, we need a sense of security to create. It's not great to create when they're kicking you out of your house or you can't pay bills or you're stressing and everything. It's not a very fertile field to pull from when you're stressing and when things are horrible.
Plus, the most famous characters in the world by this point, a massive multinational thing like Iron Man and all that, selling, 40, 50,000 copies globally in the English language, Right. It's completely crazy, isn't it? I don't know. There seemed to be some complete breakdown between the Hollywood side of things and the publishing side of things, isn't there?
On purpose. On purpose.
Do you think it was on purpose?
Yes, obviously on purpose. Otherwise, we would have had them working closer. There's a respect level. It's not the actors, it's the business people. Why would we change this when we're getting such a bargain? We're getting these creative people doing things for so cheap. And they keep doing it even though they don't own any of it. Like they'll keep doing it. Why would we want to change that?
But why do you think that Marvel East, at the time when Tony Stark is the most famous character in the world, they don't put Tony Stark even in the Iron Man book or whatever, like there was crazy stuff was going on there in terms of publishing. Like it felt like there was a complete breakdown between the East and West wings of the company, didn't it?
I think there was. Joe would be great at this answer, right? Joe would know this question better.
Well, that's kind of post Joe, though, isn't it? I think it's probably after Joe. He'd moved into a different role, sort of, a bit more West Coast in the television.
Maybe more of a Dan Buckley question then.
Yeah,
right.
Because it's odd though, isn't it? Because imagine your line of books. Suddenly had billion-dollar franchises out there that could sell those books.
I personally, as the business part of me, and people are going to hate to hear this. They're going to hate to hear this. The business part of me would have just licensed all of those characters And I would have kept the IP generation machine going, meaning I would do new stuff with the company, and I would let another company do Iron Man and Batman, and I would just license them, because why would I need to spend more time on already established things? Let me be the IP generator for the company, or at least create a secondary part of the company where it's only IP generation.
So what do you mean licensing? You would license Iron Man out or whatever, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would be very smart about it. I would license it to people that are going to be brilliant with it, right? That care about it. But I would probably try, if I was a company like a Warner Brothers or a Marvel or Disney, I would be very concerned about creating new properties. And if you look at both companies right now, they're not doing that. They're not. There's no Icon anymore. There's no Valiant anymore. So you look at those and you're like, can you still call those companies IP generators at this point?
They're more like they're curators of IP as opposed to creators.
And that's and I'm not even saying you have to give it out to somebody else. I'm saying I would create another division of both publishers and say, you guys do the regular comics. We're creating a label that it's all new stuff, and we're going to work with creators.
Do you know the one thing that makes that a problem, though, is the Image deal is so good, that kind of thing where you own it entirely yourself. And they ran into the problem at Vertigo and the other subsidiaries of places like DC.
Well, I could take that apart quickly. Image doesn't pay you a page rate.
Yeah, that's true. It's only if you can afford to work for free. Yeah, that's true. That's a good point.
So how many people in our business can afford to do 6 issues of a book before it comes out without taking a dime?
But if you're a guy who can really sell a book and make a lot of money selling, a big name comic, then you can do it, So that was the problem. A lot of that super A-list talent, if you're Frank Miller, you're not going to go and create something.
Right, but if you're Frank Miller, you're just going to publish it yourself on some level, right? I mean,
I think that's what's happened. There was other options, wasn't there? People just went elsewhere.
I think there's a. Image is a great deal if you're established and you can sell the book. But let's be honest, there's books that come out from Image that do 6,000 to 8,000 copies, and the creators, how can they make their money back? They're not going to.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, this is the big secret just now, is that people hate to hear this, but if Marvel and DC aren't doing well, people aren't coming into the comic stores and they're not picking up any of the indie books, So we're in a period just now where we really need a good Marvel and DC.
Yeah, I think, and again, I'm not saying they should go out and license the books. What I'm saying is both companies should create an IP generation company and be insanely fair with them, because in the Warner Brothers and in the Disney group, they can take that IP and create shows, and whatever they want to do, they can make those creators actual money. Where, let's be honest, not everybody has an agent, not everybody has great representation, and a lot of stuff gets lost. If it's not in somebody's face that minute, it doesn't exist sometimes. Yeah. And or if you don't have 18 things sold, they don't look at the next one right away. First look deals are all come down to how scared is that person at that company to okay something, because now they're online for that thing. But when you do it internally, in a company like Disney or Warner Brothers, you have a group. Not all of them are going to catch on, and that's okay. That's part of the IP process of development, right? So there's less risk there, because where one hits, another one doesn't. They're not going to fire the whole crew because one didn't. Where right now, if you're at Netflix or at one of these places and you okay a show and it bombs, it has a lot to do with the person that brought it in. So they're not as quick, let's say, to okay things as they used to be, especially after the strike. And these days, there's a lot more fear involved with promoting.
Netflix are actually pretty good, I think, because Netflix are still very fluid in terms of cash.
Yes.
Netflix are good at kind of like, let's try this, let's roll the dice. Yeah. It's funny, one of my friends 10 years ago, one of my pals who was working at Disney, he was very senior, and he said to me, the trick is to get nothing made. And I was like, what do you mean? And he was like, I wouldn't say what number he was at the company, but he was super high up. He said, because we've got really nice lives just now, and we get a good wage and we get great perks and everything, He says, but if something gets made and fails, then I get fired on Monday, So what I do is I love to take a lot of meetings, and I'm terrified if something goes into production because it might fail, And it's the corporate way of looking at things is so different from the way we look at things.
Right.
As creators, we just want to make everything, don't we? Yeah.
It's probably why 99.9% of my energy goes into making a great comic.
Yeah.
Because what happens to it afterwards is out of my hands on every level, somewhat. Once somebody takes it and goes to stuff, it's out of my hands. And 99 out of 100 times, usually nothing happens with it. Even if you have a development deal, I've had 14 development deals in the past 6 years, and none of them have gone through. They've gone through the whole life of the deal and not being renewed. And my only party with that is, okay, it's finally back to me again, so now I can try to sell it somewhere. But for me, it hasn't been a great way to make a living. I make a living making comics for people that like to read comics, and that is the core of my focus. I wish I was a little more aggressive. I wish I was a little more connected. I wish I had the energy I had when I was in my 20s, for sure. But I'm also very happy with the way things are going and what I'm doing and what I got coming out and all that stuff. So
I always say, you see all this stuff where people diss comics, but I mean, as guys who've worked in Hollywood and comics, look at our walls behind us. It's all our comic stuff, that's the stuff that it's the most fun you could ever possibly have. I always say, some people come up to me and they say, I hear the industry's in a bad place. Is it a bad move to try and get into it? And it's like, it's the best job in the world. Go for it.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because we're all in our own heads. I think comic creators are all in our own heads too much. We definitely spend too much time up there thinking about stuff that doesn't even matter. Yeah. And what matters for me, I mean, my goal is, my relationship, number one. Number two, my family and friends. Number three, health. Number four, I'm doing something I'm happy doing. And whether it sells a ton or it sells a few, it doesn't take away the pride I have for that particular thing. Some of my best-selling books are not the first ones I would give you to read.
Sure.
Some of my least-selling ones are the first ones I'd say, read this, you'll love this. And it's that's how ideas are. Sometimes people grab them, sometimes they don't. But it's the fun of what we do is we don't know. I think if we knew everything we did was going to be successful from now on, it would certainly kill the edge to what we do on some level. And we'd also be less motivated. I love the idea of, I don't know if the thing's going to bomb or not. I did a Kickstarter. I literally broke even, where I made no money from it. But I was so happy to get that story out of my head because it's been in my head for like 15 years. And I was like, I don't have to ever think about that. And I know you do that too, where you sit there and go, you watch a movie trailer and go, oh, that's just like that idea I had. Okay. Well,
And it can ruin your night, can't it? Sometimes or even a scene in a movie. Like, I went to see a movie last night, and there's a scene that's like a scene that I've just written, and I'm like, oh. And you feel sick all the way through the movie.
Oh, I have it where I get 6 emails from friends going, they stole your idea. That's because my friends that are not in the business, right?
Yeah.
They stole your idea, and I always tell them, I'm like, look, I was like, all the ideas are just like a foot over our heads. And the first one is just grab it and pull it down and make it wins. And I said, but even then you don't win because you can do a book. I've done books where I see a film and they just change 3 things and it's basically my book. Yeah. And I sit there and I'm going, and I read the interview with the writer and he says he's a huge comic fan. And I'm just like,
But there's a part of me also that I've kind of come to peace with this sometimes too, which is we all watch the same movies at the same time and we all read the same comic books at the same time growing up. So when you put all those ingredients together, we'll quite often come up with similar ideas around about the same time, because we've got the same influences hitting us. Or they're stealing our stuff. It's one or the other.
Amanda used to think the house was bugged. She's like, somebody's listening to you. But I always find too is like, and I always tell, younger writers, they ask me, what should I do to be a good writer? And I always tell them, travel. Read about the places you travel to because there's a million little history stories there. Yeah. I said, fall in love, get your heart broken, do something that you wouldn't be thinking is the safest thing to do. Take a risk now and then, do some stupid things and learn from them. But I said, because the individual stories that the life experience stuff is the best stuff in our writing. It's the stuff we remember we went through, and we connect with that emotional beat, and we're able to put it into whatever superficial kind of story we have going on. There are those moments where the characters talk about things and we know it's personal, but the reader doesn't know, but it hits them in a way. And I remember I used to read Preacher every month, and I used to read the letter column in the back. And then I started noticing that Garth, when we were out on the weekend, was taking notes all the time when we were telling stories.
Yeah.
And then eventually I'd see some nods to the stories in the comic, and I'd laugh, and I'd see in the back, of course, Garth would say, "Oh, this week's thank you goes to Jimmy and Nelson and the guys," because I knew he takes note. He's like we're telling stories about our childhood and stuff, and something hits him.
Yeah.
And he's just a great writer. He's able to take that stuff and blow it up. And that's also for us, that's the best stuff. When I was writing Harley Quinn, I was like, I put a lot of my relationship issues into that character. Yeah. And people come up to me and say, I miss that, where Harley would just talk about some crazy stuff and everything. And I'm like, in my head, I'm like, yeah, of course, because it's relatable. It's something that people have been through. So you can't write in a bubble. You can't only read and stay home and read comics and books and be a good writer. You really do have to get out there and get in trouble now and again.
It's quite nice because comics, I take a lot of things my friends have told me has happened to them and put them in books.
Yeah.
And comics, nobody sees it. Your friends tend not to read comics, But whenever they get turned into movies, you're sitting like uncomfortable because it'll literally be something, that they've told you in private that's ended up there. But then it happened to me a while back as well. A few of my friends are stand-up comedians. And I remember I came out of a bar one night and I was pretty drunk, and I saw this guy who was absolutely hammered. And he walked along and he went up to his apartment. He walked up this little flight of steps and went to an apartment. And he urinated against the door, right? And my friends and I were like, Mike, look at this guy. What a dirty pig, And then the most amazing thing is he shook himself off, zipped up, took out his key and let himself in. And it was his own door, right? He'd let himself into his own apartment, And one of my pals, this ended up in his stand-up routine. And I realised that's kind of what I do with comics as well. I'll steal everything my friends tell me.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I grew up where I had a mobster lived around the corner, right? And then 3 doors down from me was a guy that was like a button man. He's like one of those guys. I would love to write these stories, but I have to make sure they're dead first. Like, I literally have to make sure all these people are gone and their relatives are gone. Because the stuff that happened is so unbelievable that I could never make it up. It's like, it's so unbelievable. And, it's funny because I wrote this book years ago for DC called Monolith. And, since then we got the rights back and everything. But the whole basis of this story was about a monster that lived under a tunnel that was boarded, bricked in under a tunnel between Manhattan and Brooklyn during Prohibition days, because they used to use the tunnel to bring alcohol into the city. Oh. And it came from, I took painting classes in a house where a guy, one night I was finishing late the teacher said, "Hey, you want to see something cool about this house?" And we went to 2 sub-basements. And in the sub-basement, there was a dirt basement. This is Brooklyn, right? So it was way down. We went down a straight ladder. And there was a big bricked up arc wall in this basement. I said, "What is that?" And he goes, "We think it's a tunnel that went to Manhattan during Prohibition, because when I moved in, it had all these old bottles here and everything." Yeah. And I think they bricked it up once Prohibition was ended. They bricked it up. And I was like, "Well, what do you think's on the other, don't you want to take this down? We can see what's in the tunnel." He goes, "If there's a chance the East River is there, I'm screwed," And I'm like, that is a really good point. But for months, I kept thinking, what's behind that wall? Yeah. And that's how I came up with the monolith, a golem that lived in that wall for, 60 years and never moved, And it's like, so these kind of things, if you don't get out there and you don't experiment and try new things, these stories are everywhere. They're in these little things that happen to you. And I think that's the most beautiful part about the writing and doing comics is you can work that into your books and create whole worlds around stuff that happened to you. But you can't do it unless unless you get out there. And you can't write a good romance unless you've been in love. And you can't.
I love like Three Doors Away from You. You've got a button man and a mobster and everything. Like every Italian American I know is like, I hate this reputation that we've got. You know, it's like it's so untrue. You know, and yet Johnny Romita won't watch The Godfather and he won't watch The Sopranos for this reason. He said it's so insulting to Italian Americans. He says, but yeah, 3 of my family were in the mob when I was growing up.
Yeah, I had an uncle that would take bets. You know, he was a bookie. And he was a sweet guy, a great guy, my Uncle D. His name was Dominic, but they called him Uncle D. Everyone knew him just as the letter D, right? And he was a character. But I remember when my dad was sick and dying, they put him in a hospital, and the hospital was where my Uncle D did the numbers. He did all the doctors and nurses. He took numbers every day. So when my dad was in that hospital, they knew that was D's brother.
Right.
And my dad got his own room, and everybody was there. The doctors were on full call, like everyone was there. And I was like, why does everybody have 4 people in their room? My dad has his own room, and they're like, oh, your Uncle D kind of knows everybody here. They all know him, so we know it's his brother. Like, it's just that's the world you grow up in. That's, you know, I won't, you know, The Sopranos. I mean, that's all craziness, you know, all that. The Godfather. It's more definitely made it more romanticized it more than it actually is.
The Italians actually did that really well, though, didn't they? Because when you think of Italian gangsters, you feel kind of warm. There's something kind of likeable about it in a strange way, you know, where every other gangster you see is a bad guy, but the Italians, you think, well, they're kind of good to their mum and all that, you know.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm sure Hitler fed his dog just fine and petted him every day, you know. But actually, you know what's funny? I used to use that. They used to say, you know, Hitler's dog loved him, right? Like, and probably Hitler loved his dog.
Yeah.
And then I just learned recently that before he killed himself, his men gave him a cyanide pill, and he tested it out on his own dog to make sure it worked. No. So guess what? That was thrown out the window now because Hitler killed his own dog. So I'm like, all right, this guy was just horrible to everything, including his own dog.
His dog had no idea. His dog thought he was great. You know,
right. His dog, he'd come home, he'd wag his tail for Hitler. You know, I used to just think like, well, you know, he's a bad guy, but he probably treats his dog well. Nope, he gave his dog cyanide and killed him. Like, that's how bad that guy was. Like, the greatest villain in anything you can write is Hitler, because there is no redeeming anything to that guy. And anyway, you know, like I said, getting back to what we're talking about, you know, I always tell writers, I'm like, just go out and live. I mean, I'll tell you, so I just turned 63, so I'm kind of an old guy. And my wife, for my birthday, we went to a water park. Yeah. You know, because that's what you should do when you're 63. You should throw yourself down big chutes of water that shoot you 900 miles an hour and give you atomic wedgies for the rest of the day. But
comic guys quite often live to 95 or something, so you're only hitting middle age now, you know, in terms of Stan Lee and and those guys, you know.
I've learned to keep older people around me so I feel younger.
Yeah. Yes.
So it's very important for me to track down like Walt Simonson or any of those guys at a con and hang out with them because, you know.
Before I go, I have to ask you actually about what is it like being married to a comic person, because there's so few couples where you're both, you know, big name comic people. It's like, I know what it's like. I don't know what it's like for my wife to be married to a comic person, you know, but you both are. You're both married to well-known people within the industry.
Yeah.
How long have you guys been together? How did you meet? Because I don't know the story of this.
So we it was 92 or 93, probably 92. I got a call from Hildy Mesnick at Marvel Comics to come up and if I wanted to ink some covers for a comic called Gargoyles, which was a license to Disney at the time in 92. And I went up and I met with Hildy. Amanda wasn't there. Hildy said to me on the phone, she's married. That's what she said to me. She said, come pick up the cover. And then she said, she's married. And I'm like, okay, you know, that's Hildy being Hildy, like giving me the heads up. And I met Amanda, and very nice. And, you know, of course she was married. And I inked her covers, and we became friends for years. Yeah. We were friends for years. She knew me when I had my ex-girlfriend and other girlfriends, and she was married, and I knew her husband Steve, and we'd see them at parties and stuff, and great. And then, you know, what happens with couples, Steve and her kind of separated, and at the time, I was separated from Carrie at the time, and then Amanda went and hit on me and seduced me. So that was that. And she will admit that she like went after me. But we've been together ever since. I would say I want to say like 95, 96, maybe around then. You know.
So far so good, going well.
Yeah, we've been together for a long time. You know, like any relationship, it's work. We both do the same things, except we do it at different hours. So I tend to write in the morning. She tends to work at night, which is like a weird thing. I can't do a lot of writing late at work, late at night. My brain by the end of the day is toast. But in the morning, I'm ready to go. I wake up, I'm ready to go. So we definitely have different beats. We're in a house where she's upstairs and I work downstairs. We have 2 separate offices.
That's what we do as well. You know, my wife's a CEO, but within Netflix, but she handles the numbers, but I handle the words. You know, so it's different jobs. But we're 2 floors apart from each other. So you guys never shared the same office, then? No,
we never have. I mean, you know, and what your wife does is like completely different, right? She's got like she's got to handle tons of people, I'm guessing, with her job. You know, Amanda listens to like podcasts and stuff while she works. Right. I listen to classical music. Yes. Nothing with words. I listen to music, or I find a soundtrack that matches what I'm writing. You know, but we meet for lunch. We meet for dinner. We travel together. The most fun I could have is being with her doing something. That's the most fun.
What a perfect way to end it. That's great. Because you're one of the few comic book couples, but you're a legendary one. Like everybody always, you know, loves having you guys along together and everything. You know. So,
we save money for cons. Like they get 1 hotel room and they get 2 guests. You know, so we do save money for conventions. I like to remind all my friends in Europe that when you do fly us, it's 1 hotel room, 2 guests. Because we love doing the shows overseas. We love traveling. I mean, last year we took 42 days off and traveled all around Europe. And you know, as you get older, you realize, all right, I'm only going to have these legs for a while, so let me go out and do some fun stuff. And it's probably why I'm still running to amusement parks and things like that. I don't want to be that old guy that goes, I wish I did that more. You know.
Do you know, it's funny, in 20 years, I think I've done 10 conventions, you know, and they are such fun, aren't they? They're really great, you know, but like, I think as you've inspired me, I'm going to do a couple this year.
I see Garth more at the cons than I do in regular, because I don't live in New York anymore, right? I'm down in Florida. But I used to see Garth like every, 2-3 weeks. We'd hang out and we'd go out for eat and we'd hang out with a group. And now I see him at cons and it's great because, of course, after the con, we meet up at the bar. We'll get a steak and we'll sit there and have drinks with some friends. And it is some of my favorite downtime at cons is to sit with the other pros and hang out and, complain about editors. That's always fun, or as I like to say, compare deals. Who's getting ripped off this month? They all forget we talk to each other.
Well, they try and discourage that, don't they? They obviously never talk about your page rates, And then you find out some of your friends, I mean, I think I've said to you before, but big name artist friends of mine were getting 1/3 of what other guys were getting and everything, So I used to write the resignation letters for them and send it to them and say, send it into your editor.
It's great. It's great. Well, they would love if we went through the business blind, but we can't, right? We don't have a union, so we have to depend on each other to have each other's backs.
Well, friendship's a union, isn't it? Yes. So everybody keeps in touch and tries to look out for each other.
We have guys in the business that run through hard times, and they don't talk about it publicly, and we help them privately, and it's nobody's business, But I'm also big on celebrating other people's success. Every time you had a movie, I went to your premiere of
was it Kick-Ass?
What's that?
I think it might have been Kick-Ass you went to.
Yeah, Kick-Ass. I went to your premiere in Kick-Ass in L.A. because I happened to be out in L.A. and I saw Johnny Jr. and everybody. And I was so proud, and I went up to Johnny and I said, I'm so happy for you, man. I'm like, I hope you have like 1 million of these, And I think it's really important for us to celebrate the success of our friends and and everything. And I don't understand the jealousy, and I don't understand any of that because it's not a part of my life.
I've always actually been inspired by people. I remember when I was like, back in the early 90s, Rob Liefeld, I heard, had made like 20 million in 1 year or something crazy, like in 1993.
Yeah.
And I remember there was guys bitching about it, and I was like, are you kidding? This is amazing. This is like, one of us is over the wall. This is great, for everyone.
I had somebody said to me recently, they said, you must be rich.
Yeah.
And I always say, I said, I am rich in every other way you could think of, man. I said, my relationship's great, my life is great, and everything. I said, money in the bank wise, well, I said, I have expensive hobbies. I collect comic book artwork and comics, and I like to travel. So I just make the money I need and save up a little bit, and that's it. But I said, rich is a weird thing, because I think when you grow up with no money, no matter how much money you have, there's this thing in you that says, I hope it's enough, or I hope it's gonna, I hope I'm not gonna be like that person that gets evicted from the house or whatever. It's funny because as I grow up, I bought my house and I bought my car. I paid off mortgages because I just think it all might fall apart at some point, and that's something that's just rooted in my system because of the way I grew up. Like somebody is gonna take away my stuff on some level.
Well, it's funny, like poverty is an amazing motivator, and it does, no matter what, it always stays with you. Like 7 years ago, we sold our company, right? And it's like the biggest deal ever and everything. I only took 7 days off work, and then we're back to work 7 days later, because it's just in you, like that freelancer brain never leaves you, doesn't it? Never leaves you.
Well, it's also, you have a wife that's at a different beat than you.
Yeah.
Like she's got, you can mess up your own job. Right? You can mess up. She can't, right? Because she works for a giant company, and it's an interesting relationship because she must want to kill you sometimes because you can just take a nap. The
weird thing, like all the years we've been together, do you know we've never had an argument? Like we're really one of those really freaky couples. Like we work together all day, we're together all night, and we always get on really, really well. Like, it must be so annoying to people, but like, I'm always so delighted to see her. Like, see if I'm sitting in the car and she goes in a store to buy something and comes out, I'm like beaming back at her and she's beaming at me. We're always in a good mood with each other. It's so weird.
I have the same thing with Amanda. She'll go to a doctor for like 2 hours. And when she comes home, I hear the car pull up. I'm excited that she's coming home.
Yeah, which is great.
Excited to see her. But I also have the dark side of me that goes, she's going to the doctor. What if there's a car crash or what if
oh my God.
like crazy shit. Like, and that doesn't go away because if we have another show all about my childhood, you'll realize that that's like a real thing. And but I tend to push that back, and I'm definitely I'm such a positive. You see, we're both on Twitter. I try to stay positive, even if people terrorize me. Sometimes I mute them. They don't even know they're muted. I'm just like, go complain to the wall over there, But when you
I love talking comic art on Twitter. I love to go and talk about comic art.
Yeah, that's a whole nother show. It's my hobby. I bought comic art since I was a kid, but that's a whole nother show. I don't want to keep up. I know this is going long for you, but anyway, buddy, it's great to hang out with you like this. I don't get to see you a lot in real life.
Well, I need to start coming to more shows. I really do, because I do love them. I mean, there's something weird about comic guys that when you put us together, it's like your brothers or something. You know, you kind of even a guy you've just met. Weirdly, you just really got on with. So I need to do more shows.
It's true. I literally have met you only a handful of times in person. But like the way we're talking, I feel like I know you forever, and it's like such a strange thing, right? Like you connect with people like that. Some people. Yeah. And then some people you never connect with. You meet them and you'll just like there's something standoffish or there's...
I mean, comic guys are generally so alike, aren't they?
Comic guys...
I've met guys in South America or guys in Asia and all that who are comic guys, and we have this instant thing in common, and you're into all the same things even outside of comics. It's weird, isn't it? It's a weird international brotherhood.
I'll end this on one story that you'll appreciate. So when I was doing Jonah Hex, I wanted to get Jordy Bernay to do Jonah Hex. And Mark Chiarello laid out the groundwork and everything. And I went out to Spain, to meet Jordy. So through his son, I think, doing the emails, we're going to meet at 5 o'clock at the hotel lobby, right? Mm-hmm. So I know what he looks like. I look up his picture. I'm like, okay, he's a little older than me. That's a comic god for me. I was a Torpedo fan, my god, you know. And we get there, and I see him, and he smiles, and we hug each other, and he doesn't speak a word of English.
Oh my God! Wow.
Now, even worse, I'm a true American. I don't speak anything else. I can understand a little Italian, a little Spanish. So we both sit there laughing because we realize we can't communicate. Now, his son is running late, right? So his son's the interpreter. So we sit in the lobby, and we're looking at each other smiling, and then I go, Joe Kubert. And he goes, oh.
Amazing.
And then he goes, Frank Frazetta. I'm like, we do this for 25 minutes.
I love it.
We're going back and we're just naming artists. Mobius. Oh my God. We're going back and forth.
The language is comic books.
Language is comic books. And then his son walks in, and we're both laughing. And his son's like, "What are you guys talking about?" I said, honestly, we just been naming artists we like for the past 20 minutes, and it was just. I'm like, what a hysterical thing, but it was like, of course, that's all we can communicate.
And it's actually a distilled version of what we do talk about when we all get together anyway, isn't it? Because we say, oh, did you ever see that Neil Adams page from 1971? But you've just taken it down to 2 words. I love that.
It was, and it was like, and I bonded with Jordy, right? Like I bonded with him that day, and I've seen him, and I've learned a little bit more Spanish, so I can talk a little bit to him. And when I write him, I just use Google Translate and write him a big fat letter, and then I just use Google Translate, and then he sends me back one in English, and it's pretty funny.
That's my favourite story on any of these podcasts so far. That's a perfect one to end on. That's brilliant. I love that. Yeah. So good. Jimmy, brilliant. Listen, thanks, Ian. I think we've got people coming in about half an hour, so I better go and have a shower and get changed and everything. But thanks for taking the time. It was great.
Oh, it's my pleasure, buddy. I've watched every one of yours, so I'm so proud to be part of it.
There's some good ones in there, isn't there? There's been some pretty fun, you know.
They're all good.
Yeah. Listen, I'll catch you soon. All the best then.
Take care.